Snow blinded the highway when the patrol officer slammed his brakes so hard his German shepherd lurched forward. Through the whiteout he saw what no man should ever ignore, a young widow stumbling through the blizzard, with a newborn pressed to her chest and two trembling boys clinging to her coat. Their car had vanished beneath the drifts. Their hope was fading just as fast. He stepped into the storm, heart pounding, knowing every second mattered. "Come with me," he said, not as an officer, but as someone who refused to let another family die on his watch. What would you have done that night? Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from. And if this story moves you, please like, share, and subscribe for more. Officer Elias Corwin, 38, tightened his gloved hands on the steering wheel as the cruiser crawled along the icy highway. He was a tall man with a broad, angular frame shaped by years of patrol, his jaw defined and shadowed by a few days' worth of stubble. Frost clung to the ends of his short chestnut hair, and deep lines at the corners of his eyes hinted at a past marked by loss. Those who knew him said he had once carried laughter easily. But that changed after an avalanche 5 winters ago swallowed his younger brother during a rescue mission Elias could not complete. Since then he had patrolled winter nights with a quiet vigilance, as though trying to repay a debt written in ice. Tonight the blizzard felt familiar, too familiar, a warning, a memory. Beside him sat Rook, a 5-year-old German shepherd with a thick sable coat and intelligent amber eyes. The dog carried a calm, disciplined presence, but in storms like this, his posture sharpened, ears forward, muscles tight, as if the wind itself was whispering danger. Rook had been trained as a search and rescue canine, but what made him exceptional was his fierce intuition. Elias trusted that instinct more than he trusted the radio, more than he trusted himself some nights. The wind howled, rattling the cruiser. Snow streaked sideways, erasing the world beyond the headlights. Elias exhaled slowly, watching his breath cloud the air inside the cab. "Easy, boy," he murmured to Rook. "We'll get through this stretch, then head back west." But Rook did not relax. Instead, he pressed his paw against the dashboard and stared ahead with an intensity that made Elias straighten. A heartbeat later, Rook barked, sharp, urgent, nothing like his usual controlled alerts. Elias hit the brakes so hard the tires skidded on the ice. The cruiser shuddered to a stop. His pulse hammered as he squinted into the blizzard. At first, he saw nothing. Just the storm tearing across the highway like a monster made of white smoke. Then the shape appeared, a small figure stumbling, another one collapsing to its knees, a third barely visible beneath the swirl of snow, and in the center, a woman clutching something close to her chest. Elias's breath caught. "Dear God," he whispered. He flung open the door, the wind slamming against him like a wall. Rook leapt out first, agile even in the drifts. Elias trudged after him, boots sinking deep. Each step felt like wading through a nightmare. The woman looked up as he approached. Maribel Dunn, though he did not know her name yet, was in her early 30s. Slender, pale from exhaustion, her dark brown hair plastered to her cheeks in frozen strands. Her eyes, a soft hazel, were wide with terror and sleeplessness. A jagged cut on her forehead had frozen over, leaving a thin red line beneath a crust of ice. Her coat was far too thin for the sub-zero winds, and she clutched a bundle wrapped in a blanket, a baby tucked close to her trembling chest. Beside her were 2 boys. The older one, Keaton, about 6 years old, had tousled sandy hair and a face pinched with cold, his small shoulders shaking under a puffy jacket dusted with snow. The younger, Oren, 4 years old, had round cheeks and dark curls, his lips blue as he clung to Maribel's coat, with one mittened hand while the other reached weakly toward Rook. The dog immediately pressed close to the children, lowering his head gently so they could touch him. Keaton buried his face in Rook's fur with a sob of relief. Elias knelt beside Maribel. "Ma'am, I'm Officer Corwin," he said, raising his voice over the wind. "You shouldn't be out here. What happened?" Her voice cracked like thin ice. Our car. It slid. She pointed shakily toward the darkness behind them. Elias turned and saw it. A family SUV half buried in a snowbank down a shallow ravine, headlights dim, engine dead. The windshield was frosted over from the inside. It had been there a while. "How long have you been walking?" he asked. "I don't know," Maribel whispered. "Maybe an hour, maybe more. The baby was getting cold. The boys couldn't feel their fingers. I thought I had to keep moving." Her words collapsed into a shiver. Elias felt a tightness in his chest that had nothing to do with the cold. Her determination reminded him of the day he lost his brother, of the helplessness of watching someone fade in a storm designed to swallow hope. "You did good," he said gently. "You kept them alive. That matters." He lifted the baby blanket slightly. A tiny face peeked out, red, crying weakly, barely strong enough to protest the cold. Elias swallowed hard. "This storm will only get worse," he said. "We need to get you all to the cruiser, now." Rook barked once, as if agreeing. Elias scooped Oren into his arms while Maribel held the baby tighter and helped Keaton walk. Each step back toward the cruiser felt like pushing through a world intent on erasing them. But Rook stayed ahead of them, head high, tail low, cutting a narrow path through the drifts. As Elias opened the cruiser door and ushered the family inside, he felt a familiar ache rise in his chest, a memory of a promise he once failed to keep. Tonight, he vowed silently, he would not fail again. Everything would change from this moment on. The cruiser's doors slammed shut behind them as the blizzard roared across Northridge Pass with a fury that seemed almost personal, as if the storm itself wanted to erase every trace of life caught within its reach. Elias Corwin, his angular face tense beneath the stubble along his jaw, leaned over the radio, trying to call for backup. Static answered him, violent, hissing static that drowned out his voice. He knew instantly what that meant. The storm had taken the towers. They were on their own. Maribel Dunn sat in the back seat, huddled protectively over her infant. Snowmelt trickled down her pale face, mixing with tears she didn't have the strength to wipe away. Her hazel eyes flicked anxiously to the rear window, where the outline of her family car still lay half buried in the drifts. Her chestnut hair, still frozen in stiff strands from her trek, clung to her cheeks as she whispered, "I can't leave it. Everything we own is in that car." Her voice broke. "My husband's things, his tools, his letters." She pressed her lips together as if swallowing a scream. Elias still remembered the original tremor in her voice from moments before. He knew grief when he heard it, the same grief that had once followed him through every snowstorm since the avalanche stole his brother. He took a slow breath, turning to face her. "Maribel," he said gently, "if we go back down there now, the wind will take you and the kids before I can reach any of you. Nothing in that car is worth your lives. Not tonight." Keaton, small, sandy-haired, and trembling less now thanks to the warmth in the cruiser, leaned against Rook, who sat firm as a sentinel in the narrow space. Oren, round-cheeked and exhausted, had his face buried in the shepherd's thick sable fur, clutching it like the only solid thing left in the storm. Rook remained steady and calm despite the shaking vehicle, his amber eyes flicking between the children as if he understood their fear completely. The baby whimpered. Elias glanced at his rear-view mirror. The child was barely more than a year old, tiny face flushed red, fingers curled weakly. He didn't cry loudly. He was too cold for that. Elias felt his gut twist. They didn't have an hour, maybe not even half. The wind slammed against the cruiser again. Elias made a decision. "We're heading to Northlight," he said firmly. Maribel lifted her head, confusion tightening her features. "The radio tower, that place is abandoned." "It's abandoned," Elias agreed, "but it's 4 walls and a roof. The closest station is 15 miles west, and the roads are gone." He didn't add the rest. They would never survive the trek. "Northlight is less than a mile. I've been there before. We can make it on foot." Maribel clutched the baby tighter. In this storm? It's our only chance, he answered. His tone left no room for argument, but his eyes softened. I'll carry Oren. You hold the car, baby. Keaton can stay between you and Rook. We move together. Keaton sniffed. Will the tower be warm? Elias hesitated, then lied gently. Warmer than out here. He reached for the trunk compartment and pulled out 2 thermal blankets, tucking one around Maribel and the children. He offered the second to Keaton, who shook his head and wrapped it instead around Rook. He needs it too, the boy whispered. Elias felt a small ache in his chest at that. Kids always seemed to understand kindness better than grown men did. The moment they stepped outside, the cold hit them like a physical blow. Snow lashed their faces and the wind clawed at their clothes with invisible hands. Maribel stumbled but kept her grip firm on the baby, whose tiny breaths puffed in weak bursts against her neck. Elias lifted Oren into his arms. The child felt dangerously light, like a bundle of cloth instead of a living boy. He tucked the child beneath his coat, letting his own body heat shield the little one. Rook pressed against Keaton's side, guiding him forward with a protective confidence only a seasoned rescue dog could carry. They hadn't gone 20 feet when Elias saw movement through the blowing snow, a figure approaching down the highway. His hand instinctively flew to the flashlight at his belt. Stay behind me, he ordered quietly. The figure stumbled closer, a tall, wiry man in his 50s wearing an orange, reflective highway jacket. His gray beard was crusted with ice, and his narrow face was flushed from the cold. His steps were uneven, but his eyes were alert, scanning the road with practiced caution. This was Gerald Pike, a highway maintenance worker Elias had met once before. A quiet, gruff man who preferred machines to people and rarely spoke unless necessary. Elias knew Gerald had lost a daughter in a winter crash 10 years earlier. It had changed him, hollowed him, but it also made him fiercely protective of anyone caught in storms. Gerald raised a gloved hand as he approached. Corwin, he called through the wind. Thought that was your cruiser. His voice was rough, gravelly, shaped by years of shouting over engines. He frowned at the family behind Elias. Bad night to be out. Their car went off the road, Elias replied. Kids are freezing. I'm taking them to Northlight Tower. Gerald stepped closer, studying Maribel with a solemn, assessing look. You got little ones, he murmured. Then don't waste time. Roads closing behind me. Storms shifting east. You've got maybe 20 minutes before the ridge becomes a whiteout. Maribel's knees wobbled. Elias steadied her. Gerald turned to him. I'm heading back to my shed near mile marker 17. If the wind drops, I'll radio for help. But you... He pointed a shaking finger toward the dark silhouette of the tower somewhere beyond the storm. You get them inside. Keep them moving. Don't let them sit down. And whatever you do, don't stop walking. Elias nodded. Thank you, Gerald. Gerald grunted. Just don't let those kids end up like mine. Then he staggered back into the storm, swallowed by the white curtain within seconds. Elias tightened his grip on Oren. All right, he said softly. We go now. Rook barked once, sharp, determined, and took the lead. With the blizzard clawing at their backs and the highway disappearing beneath the rising drifts, they began the desperate mile toward the abandoned tower, each step a race against the storm that wanted to bury them where they stood. And Elias knew if he failed here, he would never forgive himself again. The storm thickened into a white wall that swallowed the world, turning the path toward Northlight Radio Tower into a shifting maze of wind and snow. Elias Corwin pushed forward, his tall, angular frame hunched to shield the small bundle of Oren tucked inside his coat. The boy's faint breaths warmed the fabric near Elias's chest, reminding him with every step that stopping was not an option. His jaw tightened beneath the rough stubble along his cheeks, and frost collected in the creases around his eyes, but determination held him upright. Behind him, Maribel Dunn fought to stay balanced, her slender figure nearly bending under the force of the wind. She kept her dark hair pressed beneath the hood, of the thermal blanket Elias had given her, though long, frozen strands still whiplashed across her pale cheeks. She clung to her baby, whose tiny red face peeked out from layers of cloth. Her hazel eyes flickered with exhaustion and panic, but also with a fierce maternal resolve, a determination born the moment she lost her husband 3 months earlier and had to become the sole protector of her children. Every blast of wind made her legs tremble, but she continued, matching Elias's pace without complaint. Keaton trudged beside her, small boots sinking into the deep snow with each step. At 6 years old, with sandy hair flattened by frost and his thin shoulders barely visible beneath the blanket, he looked impossibly fragile, but his jaw was clenched, and he held tight to Rook's fur as though drawing strength from the dog. And Rook, the sable-coated shepherd with amber eyes, walked like a living rampart, pressing his body against Keaton's legs to block the worst of the wind. Snow clung in icy patches to the dog's coat, but his stride remained steady and confident, nose lifted as if reading the storm's movements. A violent gust slammed into them. Maribel staggered. Rook lunged sideways, bracing her with his shoulder. Elias pivoted, reaching out to keep her upright. "You all right?" he shouted over the roar. She nodded, though her lips were pale. My legs don't feel like mine anymore." "They won't for a while," Elias replied, "but you're still moving. That's what matters." Another blast of wind struck even stronger, and Elias realized the storm was shifting. The air grew sharper, the cold biting through the layers of his clothing. He scanned the landscape, what little he could see of it through the whiteout. The tower should have been visible by now, even faintly. He gripped Oren closer. Every stride felt heavier, as if the storm wanted to pull them backward. A shadow formed in the snow ahead, something tall and narrow. Elias squinted. "There," he said, pointing. "We're close." The shape solidified into a wooden signpost, half buried in the drifts. A directional arrow pointed toward a narrow side path, one Elias remembered from years of patrolling the area, a shortcut leading around a rocky ridge. Normally, the trail was safe enough. Tonight it was hesitatingly close to a gamble. "We take this path," he said. "It'll cut the distance by a third." Maribel looked at the trail, a narrow corridor between snow-laden pines, branches bending under the weight of ice. Her breath hitched. "Is it safe?" "It's safer than staying out here," Elias said, "but stay close." They turned down the trail, entering a corridor of creaking branches and swirling snow. Rook forged ahead, nose sweeping the ground, tail straight and alert. The storm was slightly weaker under the trees, but the cold still pressed against them like an iron weight. As they moved deeper, a cracking sound echoed overhead. Elias instinctively shielded the child in his coat, but it was only a branch weighted with ice, snapping and falling into the snow behind them. Keaton jumped, gripping Rook's fur tighter. "You're doing great," Elias told the boy. "Just keep walking." Keaton nodded, though his voice was barely more than a whisper. "Does the tower have lights?" "It has a generator," Elias said, "if it hasn't frozen over." Maribel's eyes tightened. "And if it has?" Elias hesitated, but only for a moment. "Then I'll make a fire. One way or another, we'll be warm." They continued forward, but the trail narrowed further, and the snow deepened to Elias's knees. Rook suddenly stopped, ears pricked. His muscles stiffened beneath his thick coat. "What is it, boy?" Elias murmured. Before he could take another step, a silhouette emerged from the swirling white ahead, a hunched figure dragging something heavy behind. At first, Elias thought it was Gerald Pike returning, but the gait was all wrong. Too light, too erratic. The figure stumbled forward, revealing a young man in his early 20s. He had a narrow face, freckles dusting his cheeks, and a mop of copper hair plastered to his forehead by melting snow. His clothes, a thin outdoor jacket and ripped jeans, were wholly inadequate for the weather. His lips were blue and his hands shook violently as he clutched a metal toolbox with both arms. Elias stepped forward. "Hey, you lost?" The young man blinked at him sluggishly. then collapsed to his knees. I was trying to get to the tower, he rasped. Name's Thane Mulligan. I fix transmitters. Thought maybe I could get the old generator running. Figured someone might need it tonight. His voice wavered through chattering teeth. Thane's thin build and simple, earnest gaze suggested someone kind, but inexperienced. Someone whose life had been shaped by trying too hard for people who rarely thanked him. Elias knelt beside him while keeping Oren secure. Can you stand? Thane nodded weakly. Good, you're coming with us. Maribel helped lift the young man while Elias supported the toolbox. Rook sniffed Thane's jacket, then moved behind him, guiding him forward with gentle nudges. With the combined group now larger and slower, they pressed onward through the final stretch of forest. The wind screamed through the treetops, but ahead, a dark outline rose above the storm. North Light Radio Tower, leaning slightly from years of disrepair, its metal frame coated in thick ice. The small operations building crouched at its base, half buried in snow. Elias exhaled, relief warming his chest. There, that's our shelter. Just a little more. And with the storm chasing them like a living thing, they made the final push toward the tower that would decide whether the night ended in survival or silence. The steel door of the Northlight Radio Tower building groaned as Elias Corwin forced it open, its hinges screeching like something waking unwillingly from decades of neglect. The group stumbled inside one by one, shedding a cloak of snow as the wind slammed the door shut behind them. The interior was cold and shadowed, but compared to the brutal blizzard outside, it felt like the last surviving pocket of the world. A thin layer of dust coated the concrete floor, and the smell of old wiring and rust lingered in the stale air. Elias adjusted Oren, still tucked beneath his coat, and surveyed the room with quick, practiced eyes. His tall, broad frame cast long shadows across the cracked walls, his breath misting in the dimness. Rook shook himself beside him, sending small flakes of snow scattering across the floor. The shepherd's sable coat bristled as he examined every corner with disciplined caution, amber eyes glowing faintly in the low light. The dog moved with purpose, sniffing for danger, then settled only when he found nothing but dust and age. Maribel Dunn sank into a crouch near the far wall, pulling the baby close. Her slender body shook with exhaustion, her pale skin almost translucent under the harsh overhead bulb that flickered to life after Elias hit the breaker. Her dark brown hair, thawing slowly, clung damply to her temples. She pressed her lips to her infant's forehead, murmuring reassurance as she rocked him gently. 2 hours walking in the storm had drained her strength, and the hollow bruise of grief in her hazel eyes deepened each time she exhaled. Keaton dropped down beside her, sandy hair flattened by melted frost, his small frame swaddled in a blanket Elias had wrapped around him earlier. He looked around the room with a mixture of fear and curiosity, gripping Rook's fur as though afraid the dog might vanish. Oren, waking slightly in Elias's arms, let out a weak whimper. Elias immediately knelt and adjusted the blanket around the boy, murmuring soothing words as he set him beside his mother. Thane Mulligan, the young technician they had rescued along the trail, stumbled toward the corner where the generator lay buried under discarded equipment. His copper hair was still half frozen, freckles stark against his chilled skin. Shivering but determined, he brushed dust off the machine with trembling hands. If I can get this running, he said through chattering teeth, we'll have heat, maybe even enough power to contact someone. Elias rested a hand on the young man's shoulder. Only if you're steady enough to work, he said. You're still freezing. Thane offered a shaky smile, his earnest nature flickering through the fatigue. I've been colder, he muttered, though the wobble in his stance said otherwise. Elias didn't press. He had seen many men claim toughness when what they really needed was a moment to breathe. He moved to the small service room adjacent to the main chamber. Using his flashlight, he sorted through old shelves littered with debris, empty toolboxes, cracked insulators, bundles of corroded wires. He found a stack of broken wooden crates and hauled them back to the center of the room. "These will do," he said. With flint and patience, Elias sparked a small fire inside a metal bin he had overturned for safety. A warm orange glow spread through the room, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Maribel exhaled shakily as the warmth reached her hands, and Keaton scooted closer with Oren pressed to his side. Rook lay across the boy's legs, thick coat radiating heat like a living blanket. His steady breathing soothed them more than any fire could. Elias watched them for a moment, two children who had nearly frozen to death now drifting toward sleep with their hands buried in the fur of a shepherd who acted like he had chosen them the moment he saw them. Maribel finally looked up at Elias. "I thought we were going to die out there," she whispered. "The car slid so fast, I didn't even know it was a drop. I grabbed the baby, Keaton grabbed Oren. I didn't think, I just ran. I thought if I kept moving, maybe—" Her voice broke. She wiped her eyes with the edge of her sleeve. "I thought if I could make it a little farther, someone would see us. I didn't know the highway was this dangerous." Elias settled beside the fire, resting his arms on his knees. His short chestnut hair was damp now, melted snow tracing lines across his rugged features. He listened in silence, letting her speak. He had learned long ago that sometimes survival wasn't the hardest part, it was the remembering. "No one should have to make the choices you made tonight," he said softly, "but you kept moving. You kept them alive. You did what a parent does." Maribel swallowed hard, her hazel eyes reflecting the firelight. "I only kept going because stopping felt like giving up." He nodded slowly. "Stopping is never an option out there, not in storms like this." Keaton's voice came softly. "Officer Corwin, are we safe now?" Elias looked toward the door, the thick steel, the storm pounding outside like a beast denied its prey, and then back to the boy. "Tonight you're safe," he said. "I'll stay awake. Nothing will happen to you while I'm here." His words hung in the air, heavy with sincerity. For a man haunted by past failures, the promise was more than reassurance. It was a pledge carved into the core of who he was. Thane crawled back toward the group, wiping grease from his palms. "Generators frozen solid," he reported. "But I can try to thaw some parts near the fire. If we're lucky, it might start." Elias nodded. "Do what you can, but don't push yourself." The storm hammered the tower outside, shaking the walls, but inside the room the fire crackled steadily, pushing back the dark. The group huddled around the warmth, Maribel holding her baby close, the boys curled against Rook's thick coat, Thane working with quiet determination, and Elias watching them all with a weary, protective gaze. He leaned his back against the wall, one hand resting on Rook's flank. The warmth of the dog's fur grounded him, easing the ache of memories frozen deep in his mind. "Tonight," he repeated quietly to himself, "I'll keep watch." And in that dim, flickering room, the last room of light for miles, Elias Corwin meant every word. A thin blade of sunlight pierced the frost-clouded horizon, spreading slowly across the mountains like a golden promise the storm had tried and failed to bury. The Northlight radio tower, coated in thick sheets of ice, gleamed under the newborn light. Inside the small operations building, the air had finally begun to warm from the weak fire Elias Corwin had kept alive through the night. The blizzard's roar faded into a distant whisper, replaced now by the creaking thaw of metal and the soft, exhausted breathing of the people he had fought so hard to protect. Elias, tall and broad-shouldered, rested with his back against the wall, stubble shadowing the sharp line of his jaw. His chestnut hair, still damp from melted snow, fell messily across his forehead. He had not slept, not even for a second. The weight of responsibility settled on him like an anchor, but it was a weight he carried willingly. His dark eyes remained alert even in the quiet morning, watching the room where the small family he had rescued lay huddled beneath blankets. Maribel Dunn stirred first. She blinked against the pale morning light streaming through cracks in the frost-covered window. Her slender frame was curled protectively around her infant, whose tiny breaths warmed her collarbone. Her hazel eyes bruised by grief, but strengthened by a mother's fierce resolve, softened when they found Keaton and Orin curled together beside Rook. The dog had lain across the boys like a guardian of old stories, his thick sable fur rising and falling with each calm breath. His amber eyes opened briefly, then closed again with a satisfied sigh, tail thumping lightly against the floor. Thane Mulligan, the young technician with copper hair and freckles, slept slumped near the coal generator. He had worked until his fingers stiffened, refusing to rest until Elias insisted. His thin frame was draped awkwardly over a toolbox, but exhaustion had claimed him completely. Even in sleep, the earnestness in his features remained, the kind of softness shaped by years of trying quietly to make things better for others. A faint crackle sounded from the far end of the room. Elias rose instantly, his boots scraping against the floor. He crossed to the mounted cabinet where the old emergency radio sat. The device had been dead for most of the night, its wires brittle with age. But as he tapped the panel, a burst of static hissed through the speaker, followed by a faint voice. "This is Crestwell Search and Rescue. Repeat. If anyone can hear us, respond." Elias snatched the receiver. "This is Officer Elias Corwin. I have 4 civilians and 1 additional adult with me at the Northlight Tower. We need immediate extraction." A pause. Then, "Copy that, officer. Weather cleared faster than expected. 2 snowcats are en route. Hold position." Elias set the receiver down, his shoulders finally loosening. Relief swept through him like a slow-burning fire. Maribel approached him, baby, in her arms, her steps unsteady but purposeful. "They're coming?" she asked. Elias nodded. "They'll be here soon." She exhaled a trembling breath and pressed her free hand to her mouth. Tears welled in her eyes, this time not from fear but release. "I thought we wouldn't see morning," she whispered. Elias looked down at her, at the woman who had walked through a storm with her children, because hope had refused to let her stop. "You got them this far," he said quietly. "I just helped with the last stretch." Rook rose and padded over to Elias, leaning his weight gently against the officer's leg. The dog's fur glowed in the morning light, highlighting the strength and steadiness in his posture. Maribel reached out to stroke his head, and Rook nudged her hand, tail wagging gently. Keaton woke next, rubbing his sandy hair sleepily. "Is it morning? Are we safe now?" Elias crouched to his level. "Yes, buddy, the storm's over. Help is almost here." The boy threw his arms around Rook, burying his face in the shepherd's neck. Orin stirred, blinking wide eyes that still held the raw vulnerability of the night before. Elias lifted the little boy and settled him into Maribel's arms, then helped her adjust the blankets around both children. Minutes later, a low rumble echoed in the distance. Deep, steady, unmistakable. Snowcats. The rescue convoy emerged from behind the ridge, their lights glowing like beacons across the frozen pass. Thane jolted awake at the sound. "We're saved?" he mumbled. Elias smirked slightly. "You can finally warm up somewhere with actual heat." The rescue team, a group of 3 bundled figures, approached the tower door. Among them was Sergeant Dana Merrick, a weather-hardened woman in her 40s, tall and lean, with steel-gray hair pulled tightly beneath her cap. Her features were sharp, carved by years of dealing with mountain storms and emergency calls. Her deep-set blue eyes flicked across the group with swift, practiced assessment. Dana was known in Crestwell for her unshakable composure, shaped by a childhood spent in foster homes that taught her to become the protector she once desperately needed. "You did good, Corwin," Dana said, her voice steady but warm as she helped Maribel up. "Real good." Elias simply nodded. The rescue team escorted the family and Thane into the snowcat. Rook trotted beside the children, tail wagging as if he understood the ordeal was finally over. As the vehicle doors closed and the engines roared to life, Maribel reached out and caught Elias's hand through the window. "If you hadn't stopped that night," she said softly, voice thick with emotion, My children wouldn't be alive right now. I won't forget that, ever." Elias held her gaze, the morning sun touching his rugged features. "Just glad I was there," he replied. The snowcat pulled away, carrying the family toward safety, warmth, and the faint pulse of a town, waiting to help them heal. Elias stood beside Rook, watching until the vehicles disappeared into the brightening horizon. In the aftermath of a storm that could have claimed 4 innocent lives, it wasn't luck that saved them. It was courage, it was compassion, and it was the unwavering instinct of a patrolman and his loyal German shepherd standing firm against the winter night. Sometimes the greatest miracles do not arrive with thunder or shining halos. They come quietly, through the hands of ordinary people who choose to stop, choose to help, and choose compassion over convenience. On that frozen highway, Elias did not know he was being guided. He simply followed the stirring in his heart, the kind of whisper many believe comes from God himself. And because of that small, courageous choice, 4 lives were pulled back from the edge of a storm meant to break them. In our everyday lives, we often rush past others without noticing their silent battles. The tired mother, the lonely veteran, the neighbor carrying more than they can quietly bear. But sometimes all it takes is a moment of kindness, a helping hand, a gentle word, or even a simple prayer to become the miracle someone else has been begging for. Perhaps God sends his angels in many forms, a patrolman with tired eyes, a shepherd dog with unwavering loyalty, or even you, watching this right now. And perhaps he reminds us through stories like this that no one ever walks through the storms of life alone. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to share your thoughts in the comments. Send it to someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to our channel so we can continue bringing you more stories of courage, faith, and second chances. May God bless you, guide your steps, and place his hand gently over your family, today, tomorrow, and in every storm you face. God be with you.